welcome Mr. Ben Johnson, who's going to be giving the keynote for BSidesAugusta 2019. Just a little bit about Ben's background. He's the Chief Technology Officer and the co-founder of Obsidian Security. And prior to founding Obsidian, he was the co-founder of Carbon Black. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Ben Johnson.
Well, thanks for giving me some of your time. Thanks to the B-Sides organizers for inviting me to come out. I live in Southern California, so a little bit of a hop here. Thanks to the university for hosting this and all the other sponsors. Let's just dive in, right? If you can hold your questions, I usually go fast, so there's plenty of time for questions at the end. And I randomly noticed there's like a weird character in some of the slides, so I don't know what that is, but it's there. Just to give you a little background on myself. It's always weird talking about yourself, but I think it helps give you perspective on why I'm talking about the things I'm talking about. Much like maybe a lot of you, I got my start in the intelligence community. NSA around 2000, was doing some fun stuff, as many of you might be doing now or have done. And then went to a defense contractor, supported NSA, CIA, and SOCOM. Best time of my life. I would have done it for free, and they paid us to do it. So that was great. And then started doing some private sector work, started doing some incident response. And my co-founder of Carbon Black, Mike Viscuso, and I and some others were doing some incident response, and it was forensics. And we were like, why are you imaging hard drives to investigate malware? This seems archaic. So we came up with the idea for recording everything, created Endpoint Agent, created a company called Carbon Black. That grew to now it's probably 1,200 people. VMware just announced they were going to buy them. And in 2017, I said, I want to do something different. I love early stage, I love building, I love entrepreneurship. I want to start something new. So I moved out to California, started Obsidian. We focus more on SaaS security, cloud security, that kind of thing. And we're about 50 people. I love sitting on boards or interacting with other entrepreneurs. So a lot of what you will find in my slides, I think, have to do with like building and sort of aggression and how can you move forward quickly. And I missed the mission. So I work with DOJ and do some stuff with FISA court. As you can imagine, they have nothing interesting going on right now, so it's pretty wild. But I work as basically an interpreter of the tech for the judges, right? Cool. All right. Well, why are we here? Luckily, it's a Saturday. Maybe unluckily, I don't know. But it's a Saturday, so you should probably have fewer fires going on. I don't see a lot of laptops open. That's awesome. You can take notes or do whatever, but the point is, we're here to learn. And so really my goal is just to have you reflect, have you think about some stuff, and then hopefully you remember. And I see children. I need to be careful about swearing and things like that. But I'm going to throw a lot at you, and it's going to be some very high level, maybe some a little bit more in the weeds, and hopefully everyone walks away with something. But the goal is really just to get you to think. You get all the great technical tracks the rest of the day. So that's where you dive deep. I'm more, hey, think about this, how can we do better kind of stuff. So it's an expanding universe, expanding enterprise. You have all this stuff. We keep growing our surface area. And yet, look at everything we're doing. We should be perfectly secure. Not really. Look at all the stuff on that doesn't actually maybe make you more secure. Because we spend so much time on all sorts of stuff as defenders. And that's okay, but can we trim down some of this stuff? Can we focus on what really matters? And when you think about defender challenges, there's a huge skills gap. Now we can debate, and I see lots of debates online about is this real or what's the cause? Maybe HR doesn't know how to hire. It doesn't matter. I travel all over the place. There's not enough people. Not enough people doing the right work. Not enough skills. We need to fill the skills gap. It's great that there's the next generation of defenders here, and if you're under 18, please go into cyber, and if you don't work in cyber now, please go into cyber. There's this thing, deploy and decay, that I preach about a lot. Actually, a fine gentleman named Casey Smith was the first one that mentioned the term, and it immediately stuck with me. Because we set up our tech stacks, we set up our technology, and rather than get better over time, it gets worse. Now, new technologies, ideas like machine learning and things like that have promise where they might become better each day. But in reality, most of your tech stack is worse today than it was yesterday from a defensive perspective. The adversaries are changing, your environment's changing, your rules need to change. We just said there's not enough people, so you're not doing enough care and feeding to tune your rules, tune your detections, tune your other mechanisms. And then attackers have success. So just like any market, it breeds competition. If someone's sitting in Eastern Europe or other parts of the world, they can make so much more money on the cyber crime side than legitimately. What do you think they're going to be tempted to do? And then finally, there's just an explosion of data, right? I know when we spin up Amazon instances and things like that, we're thinking about terabytes, not gigabytes. And soon it's tens of terabytes and things like that. And you flip a switch, that whole thing might be public. So there's a lot. And I came up with this term a couple years ago. I'm not saying I necessarily came up with it for the very first time, but I said, there's this lack of cyber self-esteem, like this lack of, can we do it? We need this Sesame Street Big Bird telling us, like, yes, we can actually make a difference. So maybe that's the role I'm taking today is Big Bird. But this lack of cyber self-esteem. Now, I'm happy to say this year, it feels like we're starting to turn the tide a little bit. People starting to be optimistic, like, yes, we can make a difference. But in general, there's still a lot of, oh man, it's really hard to stop the bad guy, a lot of burnout, that kind of thing. So there's a lot going on. I don't want to talk about the bleak nature of things, but give me a few more minutes on that. And then you start thinking about cloud. Now, this isn't a cloud-specific talk, but cloud's here. Cloud's new, or newer. Yet, who protects cloud? Amazon protects security of the cloud. You're responsible for security in the cloud. People forget that, or people don't understand that. So all this new stuff that we're adding is still our problem. And clouds talk to clouds. If you weren't aware of this, you probably are, but if you weren't aware of this, it's so easy to add integrations and upload files, move data, that kind of thing. So we have this very dynamic universe, very dynamic enterprise that we're trying to defend. We don't have enough people. The bad guys are doing well. It's tough. I get it. And just to throw some quotes in here, I've heard, like, IT is leaving us in the dust going 0 to 100, right? Or we have no idea about these new SaaS accounts. Or I just heard the other day, actually, a new high, which is we have 1,000 AWS accounts. 1,000 at one company. How do you defend that? And if you're not doing a lot with cloud or you're not doing a lot with IR, the IR companies are doing a lot with cloud. They're responding a lot to things like Office 365, G Suite, GitHub. Those are getting popped. Anyways, talk about the bad guys for a second. What would a talk be without some threatscape type slides? Breaches are accelerating. In fact, you can see the latest data I have on here is 2017, because the point is not really the years, it's the fact that there's more and more of it going on. But I said, you know what, let's throw in a slide for this year. All sorts of headlines, don't need to pick on companies, but you see it, you're sick of it. You probably don't even get an emotional rise anymore when you see millions of records, because you're like, yeah, another one. So we're not getting better. I hope we can get better, but we're not there yet. And so who are these adversaries? And I don't know why that first picture didn't load, so maybe that's technical difficulty number 2. You got cyber criminals. They want to monetize, whether stealing information or breaking into your AWS accounts, spinning up instances to do crypto mining, mine Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. There's different ways they're making money, but they're out there, they're trying to make money. You get the hacktivists, they're trying to make a point. They might not agree with your political stance, they might not agree with a product you make, they're just trying to show off. Whatever it is, they're out there too, and we have to deal with it. And then you get the nation states who are trying to steal your intellectual property or look up information on their own citizens or look up information on our government officials. And then you have the insiders. You have someone at your company that maybe wants to do the wrong thing. But really, the main reason I put this slide here is because what do the first 3 become? The first 3 all want to become the 4th one, the insider. If I'm a nation-state attacker, I want to get access to your environment as if I'm an employee, especially a privileged accounts. So they want to get access on the inside. So if you are not thinking, how do I defend against insider attacks, you're missing out. And yes, there's the emotional side, like, oh, Joe or Mary or whomever would never do anything. Yeah, but what could their credentials do? What could your own credentials do? Are you trying to do least privilege? Anyways, we have a lot of adversaries we have to think about. We also just have the human factor, and there's some challenges here. Defenders, we tend to defend infrastructure, but the attackers attack humans. These two things are not aligned. We're thinking about IP addresses. How do I defend this subnet? How do I defend this host? They're thinking, how do I get into the CEO's mailbox? We have to create better alignment there. And then it's not just adversaries or malicious intent. Mistakes. Mistakes happen all the time. It is so easy, especially with cloud, to flip the wrong switch, have a public bucket, have a public database. And there is the insider threat as well, right? And I've been saying this, we've been saying this, I don't know who originally said this. You've seen CISOs of like Microsoft and Cisco literally say the same quote, but hackers don't break in, they log in. Rob Joyce, formerly head of TIO at NSA, he said credentials are much more valuable because you just log in. You don't have to worry about, is this technical exploit going to work? And finally, if you're not getting hit hard, if you don't have lots of fires going on, does that mean things are good? I saw this in a TED Talk about something totally separate from tech or cyber. So a TED Talk, the absence of disease does not mean health. You guys all see this if you're working in IT or security. Just because you don't have an active incident response, an active compromise, doesn't mean things are good. So we need to get more aggressive. We need to think, how can I make things better? So, thinking about how we approach this. We can do better. In some ways, we are getting better. But there's 127 new devices, not just bought, but put on the internet every second. So someone can do the math, and by the end of this talk, how many new devices is that? And you've seen this, and I don't know who originally came up with this, but data is the new oil. Really what that means is data is super valuable. It's like the new way to create wealth. And so if people are after data and there's all these new devices, we are going to be gainfully employed for a long time, and we got to take that challenge. We got to step up and know that this is not going to go away. It's going to get worse. And in my travels, first at Carbon Black, did a whole bunch of stuff before, of course, in the Intel community, but then at Carbon Black and now Obsidian, one of my main roles was traveling the world to talk to people like yourselves. I've met with over 700 enterprises. 700,000 miles. That's not quite my travel. That's a little beyond, but sometimes it feels like that. The number one difference between a really good team and a not so good team is, are you approaching security as an engineering problem versus an analytical problem? What I mean by that is, if you're just creating a team, pointing them at some tools, some logs, and saying, whatever comes at you, think about it, give me a report, done. If you're just thinking about it more like an analyst, you're not going to be as good as the teams who are thinking, what can I build? What can I stitch together? How can I solve this like an engineer? How can I reduce risk through building, through engineering? We need analysts. I'm not saying we don't need that, but as a group, you guys need to think about, am I approaching security more like an engineer? We need to shift our mindset. So related to the last slide, too often we have this passive mindset. Oh, we're security. We just monitor the environment. We sort of take whatever people do in the business, and then we just try to kind of monitor, secure it. You can think about it like we approach security with read-only access. We approach the environment with read-only access, and we just wait for events to happen to us. Or can we flip it and say, no, we're going to be aggressive. We're going to get right access to the environment. That can be figurative right access, where you're helping to implement policy and drive strategy. It can be actual right access, technical right access. But can you shape the environment? Can you say, no, we're going to change this one thing, and guess what? Downstream effects, way better. We have to think about it like this. We have to shift the mindset. And there's this notion of essentialism. So if you're not familiar with essentialism, I got some book recommendations at the end, because I love book recommendations. I'm a huge book nerd. Since I don't have free time, but let's just say if I have free time, I read books on leadership, teamwork, all of that stuff. Happy to nerd out on that. But my favorite book is Essentialism. How do you focus on the vital few things versus the trivial many? We all focus on the trivial many all the time. I still do it. All those emails, all those meetings, they don't actually matter. I'm not saying you can just ignore all of it, but what actually matters? Can you get to that root of what actually matters? And so the author, Greg, says basically, how are you spending your time? Where can you get the best ROI of your time? We don't have enough people. We have too much going on. So security is ripe for this kind of thinking. How do you apply your time in the best way? So we'll come back to that. So, for the longest time, we have said, what can I block? What can I prevent? We block, we lock things down. Cool, we need to do this. We need to continue doing this. But as many of you here know, we can't only do this, right? But let's call this slowing attackers down. We need to slow attackers down. Nice and simple, slow attackers down. Knowing that that's not enough, in the last especially 10 years, we shifted tons of resources and probably thousands of cyber vendors, including my company, previous companies, into detection and response. Okay, we can't block everything. We have to be able to detect bad and respond. We added lots of tooling. We must find things quicker, react quicker, clean up more effectively. And so you started to see these new concepts emerge, like orchestration, where instead of an alert going straight to an analyst, and they have very little context, you send it to some automated system to validate, correlate, enhance. Maybe you enrich it with some threat intelligence, like what do other people out there think about this IP address, this binary, these different types of attacks. What's this device? What can I gather from this equipment? Who is this user? Is this normal for the user? Is it the CFO or the intern? And then what would pop out is an enriched alert to then go to a human, or maybe soon not even a human. Much more context. And then can they quickly preserve evidence, clean up, kill processes, reset credentials? We've done this. Maybe some people haven't gotten here yet, that's okay, but we've done some really cool stuff. And this saved a lot of time. So this is a positive movement forward. And then what it allowed is for us to do things like threat hunting. By the way, this is a cybersecurity talk, so I'm going to say about 1,000 buzzwords. So I apologize, I should have said that at the beginning. But that's just the way we talk about stuff. So threat hunting, you have 100% of possible detections, of possible things you should be alerted to. Your tooling is not going to stop, it's not going to tell you about 100%. Let's say it tells you about 80%. That gap between 80% and 100%, you need to have a human mindset go in and look for the stuff that the tooling's not telling you about. And then when you find it, you go in, you give a little care and feeding, avoid that deploy and decay, you upgrade your detection rules, your tooling, and now maybe you're at 81%. Now these are made up numbers, but I think you get my drift. So we started doing some pretty cool stuff there, right? So we've done a bunch of stuff beyond blocking. So we good? Are we good? No. There's this elephant in the room, or let's say several elephants. We have employees. We have contractors. We have guests. We have the almighty executives that don't want to run your agent. You go to places like law firms, every single partner is basically like a CEO and wants to do their own thing. You go to, let's just say parts of government where there's a lot of different elected officials from, let's say, different jurisdictions. They each kind of run IT themselves. They don't really follow a consistent standard. So it's kind of scary. But we have this big mass of people we have to worry about. So what do? We start saying, don't click. Be paranoid. Don't circumvent us. Don't install that. We start forcing training. I do that. I'm the acting CISO as well at Obsidian. We have to do that. A lot of times audit and compliance require mandatory training. So we start pushing training on people. Often the lowest cost we can get away with. And we start preaching. So let's call this discourage bad behavior. By the way, the previous one, let's call that speeding defenders up. I forgot to mention that. So slow attackers down or speed defenders up. So now we're trying to discourage bad behavior among the population. Are we good now? We realized as a community that's not enough either. We can't say no. That's basically the reality of a CISO or security team in the corporate world. You can't say no. Business is trying to move fast, especially with SaaS and AWS and these other tools. You can't really say no anymore. No has become yes, but. This is a direct quote from my friend on a panel the other day. He said that. I said, oh, so the CISO is the butt of the organization, right? One T, thankfully. But so you have to say yes, but you have to do it more collaborative, more constructive. You, or we, if you're working in cyber defense, are still accountable. Can you just complain when something gets breached and you say, yeah, but they didn't work with me? Yeah, they might get slapped on the wrist, but you're still in charge of security. You have to collaborate. And what you hear a lot of times is, why did that person click the link? Most of the time they're smart enough to know they shouldn't have clicked it. But really what happens is, maybe they didn't care. They didn't care. Right? They thought, oh, this might be bad or whatever, but, you know. So apathy. Sometimes they just don't care. So can you appeal to the mission, the purpose? You got to start thinking about, how do we work together? How do we get people believing in the reason for cyber defense and cybersecurity? It's not just an intellectual thing. It has to be an emotional thing. People have to care to help keep it safe, to care to come report to you when they did something wrong. That's mostly the heart, right? So, we have to enable security and assessments and everything that goes with it upstream. We need it earlier. We need it easier and cheaper to correct, right? We have to get into software life cycles. We have to get into processes. We need to be a great partner. Really, what we need to do is encourage good decision making. You know, if you think about, and I've never worked in like a candy factory or anything, but if you think about like a candy factory, they're checking the candy as early as they can. Like as soon as it comes out of the oven, they're doing some QA on that, trying to see, is this the right thing? They don't wait till it's in the box, shipped to the store, and then try to go all over the place and check. They might do that as well, but most of the QA is upstream as possible. Upstream as possible. So we need to encourage good decisions. So we start putting these together. We want to slow attackers down. That's really thinking about the adversaries. You want to speed defenders up. That's thinking about InfoSec. And then everyone else, we want to discourage bad behavior and encourage good decisions. With me so far? Yeah? Cool. Now, I'm going to change the wording just a little bit. So, and I'm still trying to figure out what to call this thing. So this is the first time I've talked to people in a large audience about it. Happy to take any feedback. By the way, all the slides are available. Happy to chat. I'm here the rest of the day. Would love to catch up, answer any questions, give you my opinion on anything. So I'd love to connect. But you know, we want to slow attackers down. But you're not really like, it's not like football and you're at the goal line and the attacker's on one side and you're on the other. Really, like, there's a bit of distance, right? Because you're sort of in the back, and in the middle is your environment, is your employees. And I'm going to call that driving default security, because that's what we want to do. We want to slow attackers down, speed defenders up, and we want to drive default security. There's a reason why I wore a shirt that says default aggressive on it today. Drive default security, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So, if we think about this, first of all, communication. I bet pretty much everyone here gets way more excited about using Kali Linux or Metasploit or whatever the tool is now. I'm too busy managing people and stuff to be caught up on the latest things. But you probably get more excited about exploits and defending and hardening, and that's cool. We need that. We need a lot of that. But if you can't communicate, you're kind of dead in the water, at least if your team can't communicate to the rest of the business. So can you communicate what matters, why you're doing certain things, why you need to be involved in that new marketing initiative to consider some new technology they're bringing in? So the reason I like this wording that's been picked out is because it's simple. You can say, hey CEO, yeah, this month we're really focusing on slowing attackers down. Or we're focusing on speeding defenders up. Or we're driving default security throughout the organization. And I love Dilbert cartoons because they're so realistic, actually. So, you're thinking about slowing attackers down. Can you create fewer entry points, make it harder to compromise? Now, luckily, some of this stuff also improves employee experience. You add single sign-on, everyone's going through the same single sign-on, cool, they log into one thing and then they get to any app they need, or mostly. That's awesome. It also means you can really monitor one choke point. And then you can make sure everyone logging in through that system is using multi-factor authentication. But you also have to think about, you have to disable some of the legacy authentication protocols. I was just working with a team that was having 400 compromised accounts per day. They disabled legacy authentication. They went down to 1 or 2. Because a lot of times legacy authentication doesn't require MFA. So you got to think about that. And then of course things like anti-phishing, ways to just kind of block all those attempts that are coming in all the time. But can you slow attackers down? Make it much harder for them to get in. And feel free to take any pictures of any of these slides, but like I said, these will all be shared as well. The other thing is attack vectors, right? So who's familiar with like OAuth apps? Probably a lot of people, right? So let's say you're using Google Drive, right? Probably familiar with Gmail, and you can use their Google Docs thing. A lot of times what happens is your documents, by default, get shared with your domain, right? Everyone in your environment. Cool. But that guy over there just installed an OAuth app, and he gave it entire access to his account for Drive. So now your documents are not only shared with your company, but that random Moscow application. And any user can just do this. It's all about productivity and speed and integrations. And so now the sort of threat landscape, your environment, it's so different because employees can just add to your surface area like that. And then some other things that may be a little bit more on-premise. Just disable PowerShell. And you're going to say, yeah, I can't because IT needs that. Can you disable PowerShell 6 of the 7 days per week? And on that 7th day, only enable it for 1 hour. You can push out your updates then. Just do it. Yes, I know a lot of what I'm saying is easier said than done, but can you start to think about how you might get there? Or it's only enabled on even days or something, right? You at least cut that down. Remove local admin. Yeah, I've been preaching this for a long time. And whitelisting. I know sometimes whitelisting's hard, but what's a great example of whitelisting? The iPad. You can only install from the App Store, or at least it's hard to install from other places. And it gets scrutiny on every app that goes into that App Store. So can you think about how you might approach something like that? So we're thinking about how do we slow attackers down. And then speeding defenders up. Visibility. Can you collect essentially continuous recording? Could be network packets, host logs, cloud logs, DNS requests, but can you enrich those? Can you tie that together with some threat intelligence that says, oh, this is known bad, this is known good? And then how frequent, how rare, how prevalent? And then who are these people? Or who, is this a known bad binary spawning all these other things? It's good to know all those relationships. But this is hard enough. It's really hard when your environment looks like the left. And I've sat in traffic like that in Asia. If your environment looks like the left, and I'm guessing a lot of your environments do, it's hard, I get it. You have all this on-prem stuff, maybe a bunch of cloud stuff, you have some Windows XP maybe still, I don't know. But can we at least try to get to the right? Try to get to the right. Where it's much cleaner, you have gold images, you have consistent AMI images on Amazon. You're using consistent containers. All that consistency, then you can look for the anomalies much easier. When there's no consistency, it's the left. When there's no rule following, it's the left. Remember we talked about the heart? You got to get into people's hearts and say, guys, we need help. We need to get closer to the right. Guess what? IT wants the right as well. If you have a divide between security and IT wants the right. They want a clean environment. No one wants to deal with that. So we have to reduce entropy, reduce all of that crap. And then vendors. How many vendors are there? And I'm a vendor multiple times over, so I get it. I think there's like 2,500 startups now in cyber, something crazy like that. Push on your vendor. Push on them. What does it cost you? A question? Like, hey, can you add this? Maybe a little bit of time to describe what you're looking for? Push on them. If you bought something in January for a year, most software and stuff is a subscription now, annual subscription. If you bought something in January and you're coming up on renewal, this January's product must better be a lot better than last January. And if it's not, ask the vendor why. Make sure that they're progressing, that they're moving forward, so you're paying for better product in 2020 than you paid for in 2019. Push on them. You can tell them I sent you. I'll get all the emails. Push on them. So, we need to speed defenders up. You need telemetry. You need access. If there's an incident and you don't have access, you're going to be running around begging for access in the middle of a fire. I've seen teams that see some compromise in O365, they have to put in a ticket and hope within a week to get the logs from IT, because they won't get access. That's just an example, but make sure you have the access you need to do your job. Sounds dumb when I say it like that, but reality is hard, right? Leverage the hell out of your tools. You got plenty of tools. Every tool you have right now, I guarantee you, you're not getting 100% of the value out of it. That's just the way it is. That's just reality. You see some awesome demo, you might get a lot of value out of it, but there's always more. Can you pick one or two that are really helping you and figure out how you can get maybe a little bit more out of it? Maybe there's some new features you haven't even seen because you skipped that email from the vendor saying, hey, we updated something. I mentioned push on your vendors. Write code. I even put this in here twice. Why? Because it's important. Write code. If you don't know Python, just learn Python. It's really easy. And if you've never coded before, I get it. There's a learning curve, but you can learn it. And Python is super popular in security. Write code. A lot of the teams out there now, they only hire software engineers to staff their security teams, because so much of it is carving up data, pulling together different APIs, really applying that engineering mindset. I think Dino's talk at Black Hat, the keynote, I think was about software engineering is really how you do security now. So you've got to be able to write code. And then retrospectives. Did you share any lessons learned? Are you going to go in on Monday being in a better place than you were last Monday? Did you carve off time to add a new rule or tune your technology? If you didn't, go do it. Again, I've lived in everyone's, for the most part, positions. I get it. It's tough. But you got to figure out how to do this. So driving default security. This is probably, you probably think about this a little bit less than maybe the other things. So other things, maybe if you've worked in security for a long time, you're already thinking about prevention, detection, response, what have you. Can you start to enlist other people in the business to essentially attend security boot camps, or basically sit as a full-time security person for a couple weeks? And guess what? You can make it a perk. Cybersecurity is hot. Grandma out there is worried about hackers, right? I know it sounds a little cheesy to say that, but the point is, people are excited. They want to know. Like, every time I talk to someone, they're like, oh, you're in cyber, and they're like, they won't shut up on the plane. Make it a perk. Everyone wants to learn. So instead of making it like some 1970s like security awareness video that no one wants to watch and they feel forced on, teach them how to secure their personal Gmail. Teach them how to secure the Linksys router at home. Tell them how to watch out for suspicious activity for their Tesla account, right? But you can start to do these things that are a little bit more creative and gets more buy-in in the heart and the mind. And one of the teams I talked to, West Coast team, that's just phenomenal. They said of all the stuff they do, the best thing they've done is they pull a full-time DevOps person into security for 2 weeks, sometimes longer, and then they roll them back out as basically a full-time security person. They still are a DevOps person, but they now have a much better understanding of how security operates. They just keep rotating through the team. They said this is the #1 thing they've done to improve security. Is just bring people into the team, have them sit with you, go through that boot camp together, roll them back out. You now also have an ambassador, you have a connection, you can call that person, say, hey, I really need help with getting this telemetry or what have you. So think about, can you do stuff like this? And I'm throwing a lot at you because I know you can't do it all, but I'm hoping you can do some of this stuff. The other thing is, we think of access as binary. You have access or you don't have access. We need to think of access as having a half-life, as decaying. As soon as I give you access to something, it should start decaying. So the moment it is granted, you are moving to a more secure state. If no one does anything, default, right? We're talking about default. If no one does anything, it's going to end up in a more secure place if you continue on this path. You have to actually go out of your way to extend access. Whereas what do we do now? We do the opposite. You actually have to go out of your way to clean up the accounts. And I don't know if you can see, but that's just an example. Like, then you get these messy environments where the blue area is what's used and the purple is what's been provisioned. You have all this extra surface area, all this extra risk, extra accounts you have to look at during a quarterly review. So can you default to a more secure future? Think about access as having a half-life. A bunch of other stuff, like we're probably all dealing with things like SaaS, like Office 365, Salesforce, GitHub, whatever, a whole bunch of different tools. Can you establish processes to review those upstream before they're purchased? Can you be involved? Give you a secret or tell you a secret. You have to make the process easy. Because if you don't, what do people do? They just go around the process. So you have to truly be a partner. We have a process where our privacy and security folks analyze everything we want to add to our environment. But we know we have to do it quickly, or engineering is going to be slowed down, or eventually people just, they're human, they want to get their job done, they're going to find a way around it. So you have to do that. Have access review process. Ideally, it's more, what do we need to extend versus what do we need to turn off? And then have sponsorship for guests and contractors. How many times do you see that contractor account, could be a service account, you have no idea who put it in place? Probably everyone in this room has seen that. Can you tie that better to an actual employee who's accountable for that access? We talked about single sign-on, just get everything going through the same funnel so it's more, you have more security by default. And then things like file sharing. You can set file sharing in a lot of these apps to require a mandatory password and to expire, rather than just sharing it forever. So by default, you're more secure. And just disable things like mail forwarding. Just do it. Why? Why allow that? Disable external calendar access. All these things that the adversaries use to get into your environment or to further their cause or send out spam on your behalf. Just flip a single setting and you're in a better place. Your default more secure. I know it's hard, and I know you have to have conversations. That's why I started this with, you have to be able to communicate. Just think about some of these things. And you start thinking about infrastructure as a service, things like AWS. There's settings you can implement that say no to public sharing or networks or buckets that would be, public. Just disable that stuff. So by default, it's more secure, more safe, and someone has to go out of their way or get an exception to be a little bit more risky. Centralized access. I think if you're in an engineering shop, hopefully you're already doing this, but can you implement static and dynamic vulnerability scanning during the build, before it even creates the binary or whatever your output is, before you ever ship it to production? And then make sure people are educated on that shared responsibility model where Amazon or Microsoft or whomever is only responsible for a small sliver. Still on you, still on DevOps, still on infrastructure, right? So can you get everyone thinking about more default security built in? So, wrapping up. It's all about people. So I'm throwing a lot at you, but at the end of the day, it's all about people. We can do this. We can influence. I've seen some amazing things out there. We need leaders. I truly hope everyone in this room walks in on Monday into their environment feeling more like a leader. Maybe you already do, but feeling like a leader, like I can make an impact. You might be the freshest person on the team, the youngest person on the team. You might have 1,000 people report to you. Doesn't matter. You can be a leader. You go in and you say, we're going to impact this change, this positive change. And you need to be aggressive. If you're passive, security is just not going to get the seat at the table it needs. You have to be aggressive. You have to get that buy-in. And I love to say all progress is people and all problems are people. That's what I believe. So you got to work with the people. So how can you get buy-in? How can you make it so people believe in your cause and have to go out of their way to add more risk or be insecure, rather than that default, more secure path forward? So if you start implementing some of this, you work on culture, right? You got to think about the culture. If everyone is doing it or is helping just a tiny bit, if you have 1,000 people and each person helps like 1% more, that's better than a head count, right? You got to have that culture that's going to report that incident, going to report that privacy violation, that's going to do the right thing when they're building the API. So you got to create leverage. There's a lot more of them than there are of us, right? So we have to think about that. And it's different teams, same mission. So if you have frustrations, remember that. Same mission. Okay, take a deep breath, go have a conversation. Ask why you're getting pushback, why you're getting friction. I was fortunate enough to give talks at a couple conferences where the gentleman in the bottom right, Captain James Weatherby, was speaking. So I got to hang out in the sort of speaker's lunch with him. And he said he would go to all the people on the left and make sure they knew who he was. He was a human. His life was at risk. They weren't just screwing a bolt in. They were helping him complete his mission. Right? He made sure that there was a lot of that human contact so everyone understands they're working together. So different teams, same mission. You're going to run into friction. That's okay. Have a conversation. You're all in to make the business successful. And then, just getting technical for a second, there's so much open source stuff out there. Go try it. Maybe you have to try it in a lab or try it at home first, but then ask your team if you can bring it in. Yeah, a lot of the cost when implementing a tool is not just the financial license cost. There's the time, the administration, the care and feeding. I get it. But can you try some of this stuff, even in just a small like remote office or something like that as part of your business? If it works there, then you scale it to the entire corporation. I've seen teams that bought $20 credit cards and sprinkled the numbers throughout their environment in different files and in different places. And then they just wait for a charge to happen, and that's a great signal that something bad happened. Cost them like $1,000 total for 50 of them, right? I'm not saying that's the best idea in the world, but it's simple. It's simple. Simple. It's creative, right? And you're probably sick of hearing this. Maybe even you're sick of saying this. But really, the attacker has to be successful once, right? You're the goalie in soccer, and they're shooting kind of unlimited penalty kicks. Luckily, it's a little bit better than that, but you get the drift. But a big part of this talk is really how do you influence the environment? Once they land in your environment, that's your turf. That's your turf. They're across enemy lines at that point. They should have to be 100% perfect, and they're not going to be. Really, you're the casino. They're the card counter, right? You should have the odds in your favor. I know a lot of times we don't feel that way, but can we feel that way? Can we get to that place? So, we want to slow attackers down. We want to speed defenders up. Can you drive default security? 3 favorite books. If you're like me, everyone loves a book recommendation. Essentialism. How do you focus on the vital few versus the trivial many? Extreme ownership, especially if you're military crew. Basically, just how do you do more yourself? right? You can always do more. How do you do more? How do you get ahead of the game? How do you reflect, get better for the next time? It's told very well through combat lessons learned. And then team of teams, how we had to reorganize to fight Al-Qaeda in Iraq because they just moved much more quickly than our military. And so what did they have to do to coordinate across special operations? And with that, we have about 10 minutes or so. Questions, open to questions. And if there's no questions, that's okay. Come up to me after. I get it. It's Saturday morning. Yes? So you might have heard, but I think just to repeat for either video or just to make sure you're here. So brought up Half-Life for Access, what tools are out there. So there are some tools out there that are good for maybe like privileged access, where you can check out credentials for a period of time, and then by default it expires. It could be 15 minutes, could be a week, whatever. But in general, there aren't a lot of tools that'll do this across your entire environment. And the thing that always you'll say kind of irks me a little bit is when people have an all or nothing approach, right? Where they say, oh, well, this doesn't cover 100% of my environment, so I'm not going to do it. Or, I have 100,000 endpoints and you only cover 98,000, so I'm not going to do it. It's like, you got to take wins where you can get them. So with access, can you start to find different applications? For example, Slack. Now, I know that's a newer thing and maybe it has more capability, but when you add people to Slack, you can actually say when their account expires. And Slack will give you a nice message like 3 days beforehand and say, hey, do you want to extend this user's access? And all you have to do is click yes. Now, that might not be the most scalable thing, but can you start to find other areas in your environment that are going to scan for access and when people are granted, and after 90 days, they're going to automatically say, does this person still need it? So I don't have a great answer on a specific set of tools that'll do this. It's more of a mentality, like how do I implement that? Thank you. Yeah.
If you have a comment, you can unmute your microphones. They're hot, so you can be heard.
Can you hear me? There we go. Hey, so you said 700,000 miles, 700 companies. Do you have any examples of where you saw programs that really were successful in getting user buy-in to security, to reporting, to really getting involved? Do you have any examples of successful examples of that?
So the question is, really successful examples of buy-in. I think in general, no one is 100% successful, right? Like you're going to have the skeptical person that just doesn't care, but you have to keep working on that. I think in general, you have to start with either executives or middle management, but at the same time kind of think about how you're going to approach the general population. And that's where I think if you really work on, kind of more perks, like it's a perk, like, hey, come to this training, and we're going to talk about how to secure your Gmail and things like that. The other thing is, I've seen organizations where I truly believe it's been successful, but it's this multi-pronged approach, right? So it's like giving some training that feels like a perk. It's making sure the CEO or high levels of leadership take security seriously, because if your leader doesn't, it's hard for you to not, or it's hard for you to take it seriously. And then you can't slap people, right? If they come report something or got phished, you work with them. You be like, you know what, I know, yeah, this email looks really awesome. It looks legitimate. Here's why you could think about it differently. But you have to have that sort of bedside manner to go work with the person so they don't feel like they got in trouble, right? And really just education. So yes, I've seen some examples like that. I haven't seen anyone that's like perfect, but there's definitely organizations out there where everyone takes security seriously. And I think it really starts with believing in the mission and how if you guys are not secure, or if we're not secure, our customers who are maybe doing some amazing thing, they're going to fall down or they're not going to have our services, which they need, and it's vital. So it really starts with like that heart, and then figuring out the different ways in your environment to whether it's talking to leadership or it's offering training in a maybe more constructive way, or not being the, slap someone, punch them in the face kind of thing because they clicked on the wrong thing. So I think it's that multi-pronged approach. So long story short, yes, I've seen it work, but no one's perfect. No one's 100%. Yeah, so the question is, if you want to move upstream in software development, any specific resources? It's probably best to get back to you with actual list, but I think, first of all, it starts with making people understand security is a big deal, treating any sort of security defect as a true bug, right? Like, hey, if you have a security flaw, it's just the same as if the product's not working correctly for the user. So there's a bunch of that stuff. I think we use a website called Hacksplaining, something like that, just to get our developers to do some training around, what is SQL injection, what are all these other techniques that might be more related to software development. And then there's a bunch of great training out there too, where you just kind of get them to learn. The other thing is some of the tools now, like GitHub, GitLab, et cetera, you can get certain versions that automatically at least do vulnerability scans and things like that, right? So every time there's a new check-in, it'll say, oh, you added 3 vulnerabilities just on this change. Usually the change is small, right? Most check-ins are small. So then you can have more of a discussion, or they can fix it right then. So, but like most of the stuff I'm talking about, it starts with the philosophy and the mindset, and then the technical side is more specific to your organization. Thank you. People need to walk to their next thing, so going once, going twice. All right, thank you so much for having me. I'll be around all day.